The air was heavy that morning in May 1803, heavy with salt from the marshes and heavy with sorrow. A group of 75 men, women, and children, Igbo, torn from the heart of southeastern Nigeria, stood chained together on the banks of Dunbar Creek, their feet sinking into the soft mud of St. Simon's Island, Georgia. They had survived the Middle Passage, that cruel and endless journey across the ocean, their bodies packed tightly in the suffocating belly of a ship where disease reigned, where hunger hollowed, and where death was an everyday companion. They had been sold like objects in Savannah for $100 each, priced, bartered, branded, and then forced onto a smaller vessel, bound for a life of endless toil on plantations. But what their captors didn't know was that these people carried with them not only chains, but pride, not only wounds, but spirit, not only grief, but fire. Somewhere near the creek, they rose up. Accounts differ. Some say they took control of the schooner, others that they rebelled upon landing. But what is remembered is this: the Igbo captives overpowered their captors, casting 3 into the waters to drown. And then, in one of the most haunting, most powerful acts of resistance in human history, they turned not against each other, but toward the sea. They sang as they moved, voices rising into the humid air. By the water spirits we came, and by the water spirits we will be taken home. You cannot be an enemy of the land you are a part of. The words trembled like thunder. Hand in hand, chained to one another, they waded into the marsh, one step, then another. The water rose, the chains dragged, but they did not falter. Some cried, some prayed, all resisted, and one by one, they disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed by the same ocean that had carried them across. In that moment, they chose death over bondage. In that moment, their chains became wings. To the slavers, it was tragedy, a loss of property. To the descendants of Africa, it was glory. At Dunbar Creek, the Igbo declared what every enslaved person longed to scream: "You may own my body, but never my soul. You may break my back, but never my spirit." In their final breath, they spoke for millions. But to grasp the weight of Igbo Landing, we must first travel backward, across oceans and centuries, into the shadow of the transatlantic slave trade. The trade had begun in the 15th century. By the 1480s, Portuguese ships were already filling their holds with African men, women, and children, forcing them into labor on sugar plantations in the Atlantic islands. By the 1500s, enslaved Africans were carried into the Caribbean. From there, the system grew into a monstrous machine that would last nearly 400 years. More than 10 million Africans were dragged across the Atlantic. Some estimates place the number closer to 12 million. Before the year 1600, a few 100,000 had been taken. By the 18th century, the number had swelled, as the Caribbean's sugar fields and America's tobacco plantations cried out for more bodies, more labor, more lives. The slave trade was the second stage of what Europeans called the triangular trade. From Europe, ships carried guns, cloth, and goods to Africa. From Africa, they carried away human beings. From the Americas, they brought back sugar, cotton, tobacco, products harvested with the sweat and blood of the enslaved. It was commerce built on cruelty. Empires rose on the backs of broken people. Cities gleamed because villages in Africa were turned to ash. Palaces were built because huts in Igbo land, in Yoruba lands, in Ashanti kingdoms, were emptied of their children. The journey itself, the Middle Passage, was a chamber of horrors. Enslaved Africans were crammed in rows, forced to lie flat in spaces no larger than coffins. They were shackled to the floor with little room to move. The stench of urine, vomit, and blood filled the air. Disease spread unchecked, killing hundreds. Women were assaulted by crewmen. Children starved. Some captives went mad and flung themselves overboard, preferring the embrace of sharks to the cruelty of men. Historians estimate that 10 to 15% died before ever reaching shore. The ocean floor became a graveyard of bones. Even now, when divers descend deep into the Atlantic, some say they can feel the silence of those unmarked graves pressing in around them. Those who survived were sold like animals, stripped naked, inspected for strength, teeth pried open, muscles pinched, scars judged. They were branded with hot irons, marked as property. Families were torn apart in seconds. Children dragged screaming from mothers. Husbands ripped away from wives. The sound of chains and cries echoed in ports, from Charleston to Havana to Bahia. Among those taken most frequently were the Igbo people. Between 1.3 and 1.7 million Igbo were forced from the bite of Biafra. Known for their strong will, their deep spirituality, and their traditions of independence, the Igbo carried with them a stubborn refusal to surrender. This refusal found its purest expression at Dunbar Creek. Imagine it. The captors believed they had succeeded. They had purchased 75 Igbo for $100 each. They believed they had bought labor, hands for cotton, bodies for sugar. But what they had bought were souls unwilling to kneel. In the marsh, the Igbo chose their path. 13 bodies were later recovered. How many truly walked into the water, no one knows. Some may have escaped. Some may have been dragged back to slavery. But the act itself, the sight of chained men and women walking into the sea, singing, fearless, was enough to brand history. The Gullah people, descendants of enslaved Africans in the Sea Islands, preserved the story. In their retellings, the Igbo did not drown. They flew. Some accounts said they transformed into birds, buzzards rising into the sky and returning home. Others said they walked across the water, guided by spirits, back to Africa. It was from this story that the legend of the Flying Africans was born. A myth, yes, but also a truth. For in spirit, they did fly. They soared beyond chains, beyond Georgia's marshes, beyond the cruelty of men. Generations later, artists and storytellers would reclaim this act of defiance. Toni Morrison would write of flying Africans in her novel, Song of Solomon. Julie Dash would weave Igbo Landing into Daughters of the Dust, which in turn inspired Beyoncé's Lemonade. In music, in art, in literature, the act at Dunbar Creek became more than history. It became a symbol of resilience, of black power, of unyielding dignity. Yet the wider world still hesitates to face the truth. The wealth of Europe and America was built on this theft of human lives. The plantations, the industries, the cities, all were fertilized with blood. Africa was gutted, its villages emptied, its future stolen. For every Igbo who chose the sea, thousands more were forced into lifetimes of labor, whipped, chained, denied humanity. The trade did not just wound Africa, it scarred it. And those scars remain today, in poverty, in underdevelopment, in broken families, and fractured nations. And still, the ghosts of Dunbar Creek whisper. When the wind rustles the marsh grass, when the tide rises high, some say you can hear voices singing. Not voices of sorrow, but of defiance. Not cries of defeat, but of freedom. So we ask ourselves, what do we do with this memory? Do we let it lie, buried beneath history books and plaques? Or do we speak it loudly, so the world remembers? Do we honor the Igbo, who chose the sea over chains, by demanding justice for their descendants? The question of reparations lingers still. Should the wealth built on broken bodies be repaid? Should the suffering of generations be acknowledged, not just with words, but with action? For if history teaches us anything, it is that silence is betrayal. The Igbo were not silent. They sang as they stepped into the waters. They declared their truth. And now, more than 2 centuries later, it falls to us to ensure their song is never forgotten. Dunbar Creek is quiet now, but if you stand there long enough, if you close your eyes, you can almost see them. Figures chained, yet unbroken, walking into the water. You can almost hear them, singing not of despair, but of freedom. And you can almost feel them, rising, not sinking, as their spirits take flight. They are the flying Africans. They are the memory of a people stolen, yet unyielding. They are the proof that even in the deepest shadow of cruelty, the human spirit can rise, unshackled, unbroken, free.